Hello and welcome to the podcast. Boise State burst onto the national stage in football over 20 years ago and has made a mark very few non-Power 5 conferences or schools have ever made. From the famous blue turf in the stadium to 3 Fiesta Bowl victories, Boise State football put a regional state school in the national discussion. Along with the Mountain West Conference's first mover status in creating its own television network, the Broncos became a national phenomenon that still resonates today. My guest today is former president of Boise State, Dr. Robert Kustra. His bio tells us that after he arrived in 2003, he led a transformation that turned Boise State into a metropolitan research university of distinction. There was an increase in the number of full-time and out-of-state students, a focus on maintaining a vibrant undergraduate experience, and growth in graduate degrees offered. In 2016, Boise State was officially designated a Carnegie Doctoral Research University, a goal that he had since he arrived. In addition to leading the institution for 15 years, he also held the presidency at Eastern Kentucky University. Interestingly enough, before that, Bob also served in the Illinois House of Representatives and was Illinois' lieutenant governor from 1991 to 1998. Bringing a very unique perspective to our conversation, especially since the NCAA's new president is the former two-term governor of Massachusetts, Charlie Baker. Now retired, Bob writes for the Idaho Statesman and has been a regular contributor to Boise's NPR station via the show, Reader's Corner. Bob shares very candid observations and reflections on where college athletics is today and how his thinking has evolved since joining the Broncos in 2003. And because he was a politician before he became a college president, he offers his insight on the NCAA's new president, Charlie Baker. Hey, Bob, welcome to the podcast. So glad you could join us.
Thanks, Karen. It's great to be here. Great to be at Penn.
Absolutely. So you and I have talked a little bit offline, but you've now retired from your second presidency at Boise State. You were at Boise State for 15 years. Prior to that, you were at Eastern Kentucky. Give the audience a sense of what it's like to go from those two different institutions and how they view athletics.
Well, without question, the first one comes to mind in the sense that I was completely new to university athletics. I had come down to Kentucky from Illinois, where I had been serving as lieutenant governor, where I had been in office for 18 years. I was teaching all those years, and I sometimes taught full-time, sometimes I taught part-time, but I was never in an administration at any of these universities I taught. So one day they decided at Kentucky that they wanted someone who had public sector experience, somebody who could work with the legislature and the governor well. So I was hired. But what I quickly learned, as much as I thought I knew about the public sector and about governors and legislatures and how to squeeze more money out of the state for the university, the athletics enterprise was completely new to me. And frankly, I think the reason I'm bringing this up, not about me, but I think this is the point. This is the case with almost all first presidents. Where did they come from? Well, they probably came from the provost office, or they came from the finance office, or if they came from another presidency, that's another thing. But if this is the first shot, it takes some learning time to get up on just what this athletics enterprise is, how it's so different from the rest of the university, and how to manage it. And at Eastern Kentucky, I'd be the first to say that I was green as you can be. By the time I got to Boise State, I knew my way around the track. I had been through 3 years of a presidency where there were a number of challenges, just like there are anyplace else. And so by the time I got to Boise State, I felt like I had done a lot of homework and I was much better prepared. The two schools, in terms of the athletic program, were in one sense vastly different. Mm-hmm. One was set in a rural community in Kentucky, down the road from the Big Blue, the University of Kentucky, and trying to get any kind of marketing or branding for a university in the shadow of the Big Blue was a significant challenge in central Kentucky. In the meantime, when I went to Boise State, Boise is growing as a community. It's a metropolitan area, and Boise wasn't the only game in town, but it was the big game in town, and it was a lot easier to work with athletic donors, with athletic managers, coaches. They were all there, figuring we were on a route to something really cool.
You know, within Division One, as you said, these are two very different institutions. And my guess is you were at Boise State just as the whole phenomena was taking off of Boise State football, the blue turf, the growth in the Mountain West. One of the things that I learned in my research was the Mountain West was the first conference to actually have a television network, not the Big Ten. People think about the Big Ten being it, but it was the Mountain West who really led the way. Talk about those early years at Boise State and the excitement and the growth around football.
Well, there's no question that when I got there, there was something in the water that was working for that football program. I'll never forget, as a brand new president at Boise State, but having the experience, I get this letter from the football coach, and he's telling me how great they are, and he wants to know if I understand the importance of football and the overall university mission. And at one point he said something about being rated, and I thought, rated? Who'd rate him? Here I am sitting in Kentucky, having been in Illinois and working the Midwest, and the Big Ten was really my thing. I mean, that's what I knew well, was the Big Ten. And I thought, well, there sure isn't any way that team could be ranked, and maybe there's another ranking. And I literally went online to see if I could find another ranking that would take care of Boise State, because they couldn't possibly have been in the top 25. Well, they were in 2003, and they stayed there. And in the meantime, over my 15 years, won 3 Fiesta Bowls. But it didn't take me very long to get to that campus to understand that this university, adopting Blue Field before I got there, was a great marketing gig for sure, and it worked so well in helping promote our brand and the marketing advantage. And then, of course, along the way, it really helped the university. After we won the first Fiesta Bowl in 2007, that was the game where we beat Oklahoma by 1 point, 42-43. I mean, that was the most incredible football game I've ever watched, with 2 overtimes it took to decide the final score. We weren't supposed to win, obviously, and we did. And the first thing I remember telling the staff is, find out the high schools every one of those players come from. I want to send our enrollment management people into those high schools.
Wow.
And what we did is we went into California. We were already in California from an athletic standpoint. We were all over California. If you looked at most of our players, they were coming from up and down the West Coast, many of whom weren't really selected by the big schools. So they wind up at Boise State, and then they prosper. And so we went in there and started recruiting from California, from Washington, from Oregon. And today, I think half of the enrollment now, I don't have the specific numbers anymore, but almost half of the enrollment, if not half the enrollment, is from out of state.
Wow.
And if you take a look at where they come from, they're heavily California. And so I think when I talk to parents who were coming in, I would go to these sessions where we would introduce the parents and the students to the school. I get a chance to talk to them one-on-one, and oftentimes the moms and the dads would say, in the early days, well, we heard about you when we watched the Fiesta Bowl, and then as we were able to build on programming, new honors college, more engineering PhDs, more science PhDs, all of a sudden parents were recognizing that we had the same academics that they could get in California, only we could do it more cheaply, and we could do it in a beautiful college setting.
When you say more cheaply, so these are out-of-state students who are coming in, so your tuition was still less than in-state California tuition?
Yeah, and the reason is that we were part of a program, a Western program of states who participated collectively to reduce out-of-state tuition.
Got it.
So they paid out-of-state tuition, but it was reduced in such a way that many parents would tell me it was a wash as to whether or not their students went to Cal State system or the UCal system. And the UCal system may have been was probably more expensive. And I don't know exactly about school to school how that would have worked.
Right,
but
right.
generally speaking, California parents were saying, shoot, it's a wash, or in some cases, even an advantage coming to Idaho.
Yeah, that's interesting. Just give us a sense. What was you're kind of riding this wave of excitement around football and being able to leverage football in your enrollment management. And did you get the sense that the campus was sort of riding the wave with you, or were there people who were just like, this isn't going to last?
Well, today, I don't know how it is. And if I read some of the news carefully, I can certainly see that there's plenty of campuses that are concerned about the growth in athletics. But I have to say, as a university that was trying to take off and that needed a powerful engine to do so, I would say in my general annual messages to the university, we were known, by the way, for our trick plays. All right, we've had a couple of coaches that were always pulling trick plays. It would infuriate the opposition. Some of them actually thought that it was uncouth. There was something unfootball about a trick play, whatever it might be. And it won the Fiesta Bowl for us in 2007 for sure. And I would always say, that's called innovation. And if we can innovate on the football field,
right,
we can innovate in the classroom. We can innovate across the campus. We can innovate everywhere. Not too many years later, we created a College of Innovation and Design, and we hired the director of Harvard's Innovation Lab to come and run it. And my point is that we used the football program and its ingenuity and its innovation. We used it to propel the rest of the university. And to answer specifically your question about, well, in the meantime, where were the faculty and students? They were all over this. And really, when I got there, I was surprised to learn that I couldn't find any group of faculty that wanted to beef about the football program or academics. I suppose when the coach's salary came out every year, they'd roll their eyes. But I mean, everybody was all in those days. And I'm not really so sure it's any different now. I don't know anything about how COVID affected Boise State in terms of this issue of how does faculty feel compared to the way the University of Arizona faculty felt when they got furloughed, but then the university dumped all kinds of $53 million into the athletic budget in 2021. I'm sure we didn't do that at Boise State, but I don't know those specifics.
Yeah, it's a good point. So let's see. You've been you retired from the presidency in 2018. So a lot has happened in the last 4.5 to 5 years around college athletics. One thing that struck me in your initial comment was that you were a lieutenant governor, and the NCAA has just named a former governor as its new president, Charlie Baker, who was the two-time very popular Republican governor in Massachusetts. So you bring a unique perspective to what his challenges are going to be. Can you give us a sense of what it's like? You talked about coming from the government sector into higher education. What's his learning curve going to be?
Well, it'll be steep, I suppose, but frankly, it's about time. I wish I had confidence in university presidents stepping into the role of NCAA president. Frankly, I did when Miles Brand was the president years ago. I had great respect for Miles Brand. In fact, I could tell a little story about Brand calling us all together one year in 2005 and asking us if we had a compliance department director reporting directly to the president's office. And not many of us, including me, could raise our hands.
Right.
And he said, you need to go back to your campus and do that, which of course I did.
Yeah.
But it showed to me that here's a guy with a philosophy PhD who was president at Indiana. Of course, he was best known for firing Bobby Knight. That's why they gave him the job, I think.
Right.
He had a lot of guts.
Right.
I'm not so sure about the Massachusetts governor. I don't know. I happen to like his politics, but I don't know. He's going to want to get along to go along, or go along to get along, I should say. And he's going to be sitting there looking at a group of presidents who frankly they've been drinking the Kool-Aid for years, and they would see very little way, I think, to turn things around. And of course, the way I would turn things around are so radical that I don't think anybody wants to hear about them these days. But my point is that I think he'll not only have a learning curve in terms of learning what's going on, but he'll find it very, very difficult to change, because these presidents are going to be sitting there watching their own empires, carefully guarding their own empires, and anything that looks in any way like it's going to take $1 away from their athletic program or their university, they're going to beef about it. And I think that's going to be his major challenge. First of all, I'd give the guy at least a year to get to know the territory, and then he's going to need a few years to get things done.
Having worked in or alongside a governor's office, what influence do you think a governor can have on Congress? Because that seems to be one of his directives from the membership. Go to Congress, make us some friends, and possibly help us get some legislation that'll bail us out of name, image, and likeness issues, state to state, maybe antitrust issues. The Supreme Court really took down the NCAA in 2021 with the way they were structuring their educational benefits for athletes. Can somebody who's been a governor have that kind of influence on a federal legislator?
Again, he's certainly way more moderate than a lot of the Republicans in the House or the Senate. But on the other hand, he wears the right cloth. He's got the blue on, and for that, or for the red on, I should say. And for that reason, I think they'll listen to him anyway. And I'm hoping that he'll be able to get past some of the intransigence in the system. That's where his problem's going to arise, is really the intransigence in the system.
Having been a president for almost 20 years, what do you think are the issues around the holdups in having a student athlete become an employee? What do you think that issue is that presidents seem to repeat over and over and over again?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I was one early on that regularly discussed publicly the issue of student athletes, and always argued that they were amateurs and they were students first, and that this whole business of back in the day, I'm not talking about the last 5 or 10 years even, but in my early years as a president, those who were really calling for students, for example, to be compensated for their likeness, for just to use one. I mean, they were voices in the wilderness, and the rest of us were all saying, that's nonsense. That doesn't work. They're student athletes. That's why we put student before athlete and hyphenated. Now, having said that, over the years, what I noticed, and I participated in this, so I'm guilty as charged, coaches' salaries just went berserk, way out of line with anyone else's salary in the state. Oftentimes, the football coach is the highest paid state employee. If it's a public university, obviously, if it's private, it's a different story. Then he'll make even more money, as a matter of fact, in the private sector. So I gradually started changing my views on this and realizing that we can't justify a coach's salary when it's based on the success of these young men and women, in some cases, who are doing so well on a field or on a court. And we should do something about that. So by the time I left the presidency, I had pretty much given up on the argument that we should be focusing on student instead of athlete. And I figured if the coaches can make that much money and we can't get an antitrust provision that would allow us to deal with that, then we have to deal with the students, and we need to reimburse them for their success.
Yeah, so the obviously names, image, and likeness has taken the country by storm since July of 2021, and you've got all kinds of rumors running around about this quarterback got offered 13 million and that quarterback got $1 million and a Bentley, and all these kinds of ideas. The issue seems to be, and I wonder what you think about this, the Baylor president, Linda Livingstone, was at the NCAA convention this week talking about wanting the schools to be able to have the athletes report to them the kinds of NIL deals that they're striking, so that whether volleyball players getting a deal with Popeye's chicken or the football players getting a deal with a media company, the school knows all that kind of information. As a president, how do you view that? Is that too intrusive into the athletes' private lives, or because they are representing Boise State or another institution, maybe the school should have that kind of understanding?
Yeah, I would agree with what you just said, the latter, that this student still is a student at whatever university. And as a result of that, I think a university has to keep track, has to have at its disposal all of the information behind this student's activities on or off the field. And especially since his remuneration is based on what he's doing as a student athlete for the university, then I'd say, well, of course, why would this even be difficult for anybody to figure out? I mean, it does bring up for me, though, another solution, which is as impractical as the day is long, and I won't spend a lot of time on it. But we do have university foundations that are 501c3s and relatively independent of the university. In the larger universities, they are, let's just talk about the public side for a minute. They are actually governed by their own board and their own CEO. And in the case of some of them, I know that CEO does not take orders from the president of the university, and the president of the university doesn't necessarily take orders from the CEO. Yet it is called the Oregon State Foundation as opposed to anything else. All right. Well, if you really wanted to put the innovation cap on, you could think about why couldn't you do that with athletics? Why couldn't you move athletics into a separate foundation whereby, sure, it still has a affiliation, maybe in name only, but an affiliation with the university. But when it comes to these issues of rewarding student athletes, when it comes to the size of coaches' salaries, no longer will universities be subsidizing those activities. And of course, the argument that's always given is it's all about the branding. That's the way I justified my increases in athletic spending over the years I was a president. It's all about the branding. That's true, but there has to be a point, and I think the University of Arizona reached it, where the academic mission of the university must be paramount here. Yeah. And it's not paramount when a president takes $53 million and moves it into an athletic program in a tough year, while at the same time furloughing his faculty and staff, and they're suffering salaries and wages. That makes no sense. And I think that's where we are right now. I mean, I think the world has changed dramatically since I became a president, and even in some ways since I left presidency. And COVID's had something to do with that, but this image and likeness issue is another factor. And I think we're getting to the point where someday somebody in authority, either presidents or Congress or somebody, ought to say, this doesn't make any sense anymore. Yeah. The NCAA and individual university foundations should just take over sports in the university and let universities get back to their sole mission of academics. And again, I know that would be controversial as all get out, and I would never, I used to say that the most courageous presidents in the world were the ones that just retired and were writing their books about everything they
Right.
right?
Right.
And so here I am.
Yep.
Here I am. I'm one of them. I never spoke like this. I mean, I did speak like this during my presidency privately, but I never gave a major speech on how we should take the whole Boise State
Right.
athletic program and
Right.
remove it from the university. But I think we're at a point where I'm surprised somebody in Congress hasn't brought it up and figured out that this isn't really working anymore.
You know, there are at least two FBS programs. It's Georgia Tech and the University of Florida that have foundations, that their athletic department is run out of a foundation. It's separate. And I have wondered that same thing. Well, what made them choose to do that? And if it's such a good idea, why didn't more people take advantage of it? Do you have any idea what the thought process is there?
Well, boy, that's a tough one. It's multiple choice, I think, and I
Yeah.
don't know which one to answer, because on the one hand, I could definitely see some athletic departments suffering under the control of the university and saying to its boosters, let's get out of this thing.
Mhm.
I'm sick and tired of reporting to the president every week on what we did wrong and having to talk about the infractions that went into the NCAA last week. So they could be doing it just to escape the oversight to some extent. There's still going to be oversight, of course. I don't know what other motives. I mean, I suppose also they could be looking at this issue of whether or not they could be as successful when they're having to share funding with the university, and they feel like they would have more legal independence, more financial independence over on the foundation side. So one of the two, one you know hope they're not thinking, because control is still going to be important in these issues when you're dealing with students, especially. But that's the way I see it.
Well, let's imagine a world going forth, and it's not that hard to imagine, that we have the same chaos and disruption in athletics for the next couple of years, because there is a true sense that if we don't get what we need from Congress, we as in college athletics, in the next 8 to 10 months, the 2024 election is going to come up and nothing's going to get done in that year. So we could be looking at this kind of unsettledness for 2 years or more. What's that going to mean for conferences that, like the one that Boise State is in, Mountain West, which I see as constantly improving its position, but it feels like there's nothing it can do to keep up with the Big Ten or the SEC. So what do you think happens if we end up status quo for the next few years?
Well, I think what will happen and I'm going to look at it from the standpoint of the university presidency, and the conference. The conference, let's take the Mountain West, will continue doing the same thing. It will try to work with its existing members, and especially pay particular attention to those that might be susceptible to getting robbed, to getting moved over to the Pac-12. With UCLA and USC moving out, the rumors are all over the place about Boise State and San Diego State, for example, jumping over to the Pac-12. And that, frankly, I would think makes a lot of sense for those two schools. Even if that were to happen, there's still another few schools out there, I know from sitting in these conferences, that are also watching to see if anybody leaves the Mountain West. Because the Mountain West is a pretty good conference.
Yeah.
So, boy, they jump at a chance to move into the Mountain West. Now, if you move over to the eastern end of the state, you've got American University and the American Conference. And the American Conference is another one that has been very successful. Their conference head, I think, is one of the best in the nation.
Yeah.
And there's just no question in my mind that there are people standing in line waiting for those folks if anybody ever bolts and goes somewhere else. I don't think there's as much, and I'm rusty on this, but I don't think there's as much opportunity for movement over there as there is in the West, because of what UCLA and USC is threatening to do.
Yeah, actually, yeah, absolutely. Looks like it's going to happen too. Yeah, I keep hearing Boise State and San Diego State as possible additions to the Pac-12, which then again puts a precedent. Imagine you're back in that chair, imagining, okay, our competitors are now Oregon State, Washington, Stanford, Cal. I mean, how do you position an institution when that, if that comes to fruition?
Well, that's a major challenge. I think you've hit the nail on the head, Karen. The jump in budget size for a Boise State or a San Diego State from the Mountain West to the Pac-12 or any other Power 5 conference would be considerable.
Yeah.
And believe me, I worried about that. Over the years, I visited the Pac-12 headquarters one year to meet with the conference commissioner to make my case for why he should take us. This is long before anybody knew any USC and UCLA were leaving. I was thinking about making it the Pac-14. But anyway, I gave them all the good reasons why we should do it, and then I'd go home thinking, oh my God, if we ever did that, the money I'd have to fork out for coaches' salaries, and it's not just about the salaries. These coaches never have enough assistants.
Yeah.
I swear to God, they add assistants every year they're in the job. And you walk into, the athletic department, it's like, who's that guy? Well, we hired him last week. He's our new assistant coach for morals. I mean, they got one for just about every damn thing.
That's right.
And so, I mean, it's crazy. And it would not do nothing. Whoever goes into that conference, if they were to expand, it's just going to ratchet up the cost of doing business for those schools. Having said that, by the way, let's take the Pac-12 again. If it's now the Pac-10 and those two schools are gone, those presidents also look selfishly at the way this all works out. When you split the end of season earnings by 10 instead of 12,
right?
The existing presidents are going to make more money. And I actually had one of the presidents over the years who I got close enough to that he would be honest with me. He said, we don't want to split the pot. We don't want to increase it. We like it just the way it is. So the Pac-12 may go back to being the Pac-10 and they will live happily ever after. They won't have the revenue that these other Power 5 conferences are getting, because apparently that's not worked out for them. I think they're in the middle of a media agreement right now, but they haven't done so well in that sport.
This has been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate your insight. Let me leave you with this last question. Looking back on your early years at Eastern Kentucky and then your tenure at Boise State, can you give our listeners a sense of what you wish you had known when you first sat in the chair at the president's office about athletics?
Yeah, well, I think at the very beginning, it's easy. In fact, it probably applies to both institutions. I wish I had understood the importance of compliance and where it is situated in the organization chart at any university. It was Miles Brand, getting back to that meeting in 2005, that got my attention. But later, after that, I would actually have to fire an athletic director who had been with us for 20 years for 5 major offenses, and that caused us to appear before the NCAA for a 13-hour accounting. It was without a doubt the most brutal moment of my presidency. The football coach was there. He's told me since it was his most brutal moment, and it was all caused because we didn't have enough compliance officers. It was caused because they weren't doing their jobs as they were defined by the NCAA. We made all those corrections, but there is no question. And when I wrote my chapter in this handbook for new presidents, I wrote it on athletics. I hammered this issue with new presidents. Don't let your athletic director tell you that they've got compliance under control. All you need to do is meet with the athletic director. I met with the compliance director every 2 weeks after that NCAA mess in 2009 or 10, whatever it was. And from that moment on, I always knew what the infractions were, how serious they were, who was accountable for them, and that's the only way a university is going to stay out of trouble. Because the bottom line now, and Miles Brand is the guy that did this, until Miles Brand became NCAA president, presidents weren't viewed as being ultimately responsible for athletics.
Right.
Today, there is no question in anybody's mind, whether it's the media, whether it's the Congress, whether it's the universities themselves and the NCAA, it's the president who sits there in that 13-hour meeting, and all the questions are pointed to him, and then later they'll get to the coaches. But it'll wake you up as a president and make you understand the importance of university compliance.
Great advice. Really great advice. Bob, this has been a tremendous conversation. Thank you so much for taking time out to share with my students and my colleagues around the country about the important role that the president plays in all of these things that we talked about today.
You're welcome. Nice to be with you, Karen.